Hello everybody, so today we're going to start a series of a few videos on 20th century economics and massive expansion all over the globe, and so let's get right into it here. So when we look at some of the expansion that was occurring during this particular time, we're going to pay special attention to like post-World War II stuff. And really, once we get into the 70s and 80s, there's a lot of focus on what are known as market-oriented economics. Okay, these types of economics were spearheaded by Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, on the right there, and President Ronald Reagan of the United States. In general, the whole idea is to cut taxes and regulations for the wealthy and businesses to promote growth. At the same time, you're going to cut spending in the federal government level, particularly to things that might go to the poor or other needy groups. In general, social programs will get cut. The idea behind this is that with greater monies available at the top, those areas would then reinvest it and expand the job market and goods that people would want to buy. And it made sense. In short term, it actually works out pretty well. Long term, unfortunately, in the late 80s, early 90s, you'll see kind of a worldwide economic dip. But from the 70s to the 80s, there's a lot of focus on this because there was that idea that you need to massively expand jobs worldwide, and this was the way that you were going to do it. Sometimes also known as trickle-down economics, but one that we see used a lot. And in general, we kind of refer to this as economic liberalism, in which you're going to relax your restrictions on trade. Reagan and Thatcher actually pushed for things like free markets, which are economic systems based on supply and demand with limited government interference. Okay, now the critics of this point out, and some rightful things, that instead of actually staying home, what many businesses then did was move jobs to different countries so that they could pay workers the least amount of money possible, which would result in lower wages, also lower tax income for countries as well. Some also then charge that this mass focus on business is going to have environmental issues, which I'll get to later. What some of the trade-offs there are, but this is a big movement that occurs throughout the 20th century. And one nation that really will jump into that is Chile. Now, I'm going to talk about positives and negatives here, so understand. So Chile, they will embrace a lot of economically liberal ideas under the leadership of Augusto Pinochet, who has some very horrible things, which I will talk about. He will rule from 1974 to 1990, actually comes into power with a United States-backed coup. First and foremost, he will privatize a lot of formerly run state businesses, which will help reduce high inflation in the region. He'll adopt a lot of these ideas of free market capitalism and free trade that were proposed by famed economist Milton Friedman. He will develop a lot of free trade policies, and through this economic liberalism that they do, as you can see there, the overall per capita in Chile would be significantly higher than the rest of the average of Latin America. And if you look at nations today in Latin America, particularly in South America, Chile is in a really good spot. However, he's a terrible person. He does come to power in a coup in which he overthrows socialist leader Salvador Allende, who had actually promoted Pinochet to the head of the army. There's a picture on the right of the coup as it was taking place. He is a brutal dictator that will do a variety of things to oppress the people. He also had definitely shaved a lot off the top. As the Chilean economy improved, he would embezzle money to increase his own personal fortune. But the violence was just terrible. Kidnapping, torture, and murder. You're looking at least 3,000 deaths, but he imprisons and tortures thousands and thousands. On the right there, you see a memorial wall of people who were killed by the regime. Eventually, there is the move to protest and overthrow him. He will actually flee the country. He is eventually charged with over 300 crimes, most of them human rights violations, but he actually dies before the trial. And famed Chilean author Isabel Allende said, "We buried our democracy and we buried our freedom when it comes to the early support of Pinochet." Just absolutely devastating. So, and I always try to show both sides of it. Like, sure, yeah, the economy overall was increased, but this was a great example of a Cold War thing. A guy that was anti-communist socialist was able to keep himself in power, and other nations supported it because he was anti-communist, but at the same time, just absolutely devastating to his own people. So, really terrible. Another thing that develops at this time is something known as knowledge economics, which kind of spawns out of economic liberalism in its own way. And it's a new outlook on economic growth. So on one hand, we have the economic liberalism, and here something that's a bit more sustainable is the knowledge economy. And so the knowledge economy, and the whole idea behind it, is that it creates, distributes, and uses knowledge and information. The base of the economy are people like designers, teachers, engineers, who provide kind of the backbone of this. A great example of where that's happening, say in the United States, is Silicon Valley. Very big on communication technology and collaboration, working together. Okay, and on the right you see, there's an agricultural economy, an industrial economy, and then what the knowledge economy is doing, and patents and copyright and developing new things. And probably the best example of a success story of the knowledge economy is Finland. In the 1950s, Finland was primarily agricultural and actually had a lot of poverty. And with the collapse of the Soviet Union, they pretty much lost their main trade partner. And so as a result, they tried to make some changes and decide that instead of just focusing regionally, they want to try to enter the global marketplace. And so they're going to create something called the Science and Technology Policy Council to set and direct economic growth and really work on creativity in new and upcoming areas of technology. They will put pretty much all of their eggs into the basket of education, which is going to be huge. Finland today is known as one of the greatest educational systems in the entire world. It is funded in a variety of ways, but if you are a Finnish citizen, you can basically go all the way through your PhD and not have to pay for school. It's a relatively small population, but by doing that, they've been able to help revolutionize communication techs, things like cell phones, software companies, and things like that. And it's been huge. And so we have things like economic liberalism, and then this idea of a knowledge economy. Another great example of knowledge economy with a little bit of manufacturing thrown in there would be a place like Japan, who uses that, that creativity as well, but also makes things like companies like Sony or Toyota. But we're seeing these different types of economies now start to spread across the world throughout the 20th century. And some are effective, short-term, long-term, but we definitely starting to just see a lot of movement economically. All right, guys, so that's kind of just our basic intro. I'll be back with some more videos soon.